Good day, everybody. It looks like I've already got a few people here. I'm Attorney Greg Lake. Welcome to the Entheogenic Esquire podcast and YouTube channel. So grateful to have everybody here today. Yesterday's live stream went well. I actually got like a full 40 minutes without getting cut off, and so it empowered me, maybe for better, maybe for worse. But I'm definitely motivated to do lives now. Also made a commitment that when I do lives, I'm going to try to get the substantive stuff, at least put as much out kind of at the front. So that way people don't have time to sit around for 30, 40 minutes to get it all, can still get a good 5 to 10 minutes. And then, if they need to move around, feel free to do so type thing. So I got it. And again, I can't figure out whether the last interruptions in my lives had to do with the weather. My internet's connection's not that good. I do know that. I made provisions for this weekend, weather permitting. We're going to go pick up our Starlink satellite. So I should have good high speed direct connect internet. And then I've got another computer on order as well. So I hope within a week we will be, getting there, and then hopefully the podcast studio will go in within the next few weeks, and we'll get that set up and decorated right, and we'll be full tilt. I might even wear a suit, ladies and gentlemen. I might even do lives most days of the week wearing a suit. Very well might. So stay tuned, and we'll see how that goes. So today, as my thumbnail indicated, I'm going to be doing just kind of it's kind of a bird's eye level view, but we're going to just kind of be going back over, TPA, TPUSA, looking at a little bit of the evolution of those entities and Charlie Kirk and his relationship with President Trump. Oh, stay casual. Okay, I will. But at least maybe I'll get a little bit nicer stuff. I mean, I feel like a boob right now. I'm sorry, y'all. Anyways, but yeah, we're going to be looking at TPA, TPUSA, the TP entities, their relationship with really looking mostly at their relationship with Trump and Trump administration. And really, I think where we're going to be headed today, what I'd like to do at the end is do just a little bit of theorizing or speculation, especially in the comments and in other comments that live streams I see, is a lot of people are wondering well, we're looking at these things that we now know are, potentially, in our opinion, violative of the tax code. But is there going to be any accountability, right? And I think that when we saw the IRS letter in Wolves and Finance's video this last weekend, or at least that was the first time I really become aware of that letter. I think it made some people pause for a second and think maybe we won't see any accountability for some of these other, our perspective, glaring violations of the tax code and perhaps election laws, things like that. So we're going to do, again, just a quick rundown review of what we know about TPA, TPUSA, some of their, alleged violations, seemingly violations of, the tax codes, some of the federal elections laws. We're going to look at their relationship with Trump. What have we seen as far as them interacting with one another publicly? And then ultimately, what's that going to tell us about the prospects of potentially seeing some type of accountability had within the foreseeable future? Okay. And I'll just let you know, I did find, and I'm going to talk about it today, and some of y'all might be aware of this, but there was some investigation into Turning Point entities, Charlie Kirk, Trump, during the Biden administration. So towards the latter end, when we start talking about might we see some accountability here, we will mention that, and we'll talk about that, and we'll see how that might indicate for us one way or another whether there might be some accountability one day in the future for what we're seeing come to light now. Oh, you didn't know, Susan? Yeah, I didn't either. So again, it's good. There's gonna be some good information, especially here towards the end. And not that I'm trying to hide it to keep you here. That's just really where it fits into my outline here. So in all fairness. So before I get into it, hey, Lisa, we're happy that you're here too. Before I get into kind of the meat and potatoes here, and I was going to do a separate video about this, and I very well might for my channel, just so that, Barron in a live stream not long ago was saying, explaining where he's coming from on this stuff, right? Because one thing for sure is that I have a commitment to staying apolitical for sure and objective. And so I just want to explain that commitment to you real quick, just so that way you know where I'm coming from with this and understand that I'm not in any way trying to be partisan one way or another. I call it like I see it. I do put America first, and I desire our politicians to as well. And so, really, that's kind of the objective: is being in line with the Constitution, putting America first. And yeah, so those are kind of the two main things for me politically. But as many people know, I'm a civil rights attorney, and so through that work, really attached me to the Constitution a lot, meaning that. And I haven't voted in over 10 years. And I think a lot of it's just because in the work that I do, doing civil rights work, especially in my really niche area, is not a well-developed area of the law. And so my legal work in the courts really lets me feel like I have a direct impact on the law. Does that make sense to y'all? So like my legal work has really been satisfying for me as far as like me putting my imprint on American law and American policy, things of that nature. So that, and then just combined with, my spiritual journey has pulled me a bit of away from politics too, because it's so polarizing. And so spiritually, over the last 10 years, it has not really felt right to me to really lean into politics to any significant degree, just because of how much people go back and forth on it and how little of actual productive conversation occurs. Okay. And so me doing this channel, right, for a long time was not something that I desired. I did not desire to come in here and start talking about law and politics, stuff like that. But the, Charlie Kirk incident, and some other things really woke me up and told me that, like, Greg, if people don't understand some of these things fundamentally, they might not ever see the potential error in where we could potentially be going as a country. And so I have a commitment to staying apolitical. And I'll just say this, today you might hear me talk a little bit, poorly about Trump a little bit. Look, in all reality, this last election, because I deal with freedom of religion, and Trump in his first presidency actually authored a presidential memorandum very favorably, directing executive agencies to treat religions favorably, really in accordance with law is really what it is. It sucks he had to ask it, but And so with that being said, going into the 2020 election, you would have asked me who would I have voted for election. Sorry about that. Who I would have voted for, it would have been Trump. And the reason for is because really in line with my work. It would have been favorable for my clients, for my work, stuff like that, a pro-religion administration. However, at that time, and here's, just to be quite honest with you, here's really what tipped a lot of my, opinion of Trump. One is, and we'll talk about this on this channel, but I see some pretty bad civil rights abuses in my opinion. And again, we'll talk about that. But two, ladies and gentlemen, when I really started to peel back the layers on the Epstein files and Trump's involvement, and again, this comes from a lot of different context clues, okay? A lot of different context clues that go into me formulating my opinion, okay? And we might go over some of that one day, but I'll just say this. My opinion, based upon the evidence that I've seen, indicates that Trump definitely was involved with Epstein in a way that it disgusts me. I do believe in second chances and people, but it's kind of a serious thing for me. And I hope Trump is successful like Barron does, because I want America to be successful, but on a personal level. And granted, I don't think our politicians have to be squeaky clean. Don't get me wrong. But based upon the evidence that I've seen with President Trump, like I would not leave my stepchildren with him, right? I have stepkids. I would not leave my stepchildren with the man. And so I had to think, it's like, look, yeah, politicians don't need to be perfect. Nobody is, by all means. But when it comes to, and it's not really funny in a lot of ways, but like when it comes to, you wouldn't even leave children with the man, So anyways, and I don't want to get into a back and forth, because it's my stance there isn't political in nature. It's really just based upon evidence I've seen. And, again, I do hope Trump in America is successful, but I hope when his term's over, it's done for him, type thing. So that's the thing. And otherwise, I hope justice is served eventually, but like, I don't otherwise wish bad upon Trump or anybody like that. But I do wish that, to the extent that he might be involved in stuff with Jeffrey Epstein, that it actually be investigated. And if, action needs to be taken, that it be done. So that's it. So anyways, yeah. So with that being said, let's go in. So the first section here, I'm just going to be going back over some things that we've talked about on this channel. Obviously there's other, content creators, and I'm going to get to the comments at the end. So I see y'all. Thank y'all very much. It's very meaningful to me for y'all to be here like this. So I know that we've talked a lot about TPUSA, the evolution of TPUSA, the starting of these related entities, looking at some of the infractions that have been alleged out there by me and by, Wolves in Finance and some of these others, who are really, we're commentators, and I can just tell you right now, like when I've made an opinion on whether I thought TPUSA was violating the tax code, I mean, it was done in a very objective way. I don't go out there wanting to see people violating the tax code, but if it's happening very glaringly and people are giving these people a lot of money, I felt a little bit compelled to point that out. Okay. So let's just talk real quick. So we have, Charlie Kirk Turning Point, I think circa 2012, it's created. I looked up just a second ago, Turning Point Action was actually formed in 2013. And from what we can tell, from the best of my guesstimation, is that in the early life, I don't think that there was much, if any, violating of the tax laws, election laws, stuff like that going on. I just don't see any of it really in the early days. And so maybe someone could correct me and point some stuff out, stuff like that. I did see where Charlie Kirk spoke at the Republican National Convention in 2016. And so the reason why I mentioned that is just kind of like, at what point do we see like Charlie Kirk and these entities really, really, really getting involved in the political machinery? Because I think that's really when the, violations and things like that started to occur. Let me say this real quick, because in Barron explained it a tad bit the other night. So I'm just going to kind of go over again, like the thought of, why would like Charlie Kirk want to set up a 501c3 and a 501c4? Now, this is the underhanded reason. I can't say 100% this was what Charlie and them were thinking at the time, but really the play is this, right? Because 501c4s can do half of their stuff political, but donors can't write off the donations, and there's has to be reports and stuff like that too. Whereas a 501c3 can't do any political activity, but can take in tax-free donations, and donors can write that off. So that's kind of the play, right? Is trying to get the fully tax exempt, fully write offable money over here to the 501c4 any way we can to try to get it spent towards political aims. So that's just kind of my theory. And, just looking at it as an attorney, knowing about these things in the tax code, in my opinion, that's probably what this was, as far as like how you were trying to set up those two related but separate, tax code entities. What's the ultimate objective? I think early on, 2012 to 2016, and maybe a bit further, for Charlie Kirk, it really was to go out there and just generally educate these college students on more conservative values, whether it be on capitalism, free markets, and as I see, it's like over time, it just got steadily more and more partisan. It just steadily got more and more linked up with the Republican Party, and particularly Trump's campaign and that Kerry Lake's campaign down in Arizona. And that's really where kind of the problem started. But, at the first, when it was just Charlie, and again, it's just my impression, was just Charlie really just out there going campus to campus, debate, everything seemed to be fine. There's no indication that at that time there was like any kind of major tax code violations or any real intent to do that. Okay. And so moving forward, and Barron pointed this out the other night, and I think it was maybe like 2018, 19, that 2018, 2020 is, I think, the time when, Charlie Kirk met Erica. We know like in 2021 is when he brought in like Rob McCoy. And I did read last night that Charlie Kirk's move to start working with Rob McCoy really happened during COVID. And what it was, and this is just what the article I read reported, but it made sense to me, is that at that time, Charlie wasn't able during COVID to go to college campuses and do the things that he was already doing, right? And so Turning Point Faith was really structured for him to take what he was doing at colleges and go to churches, because during COVID, churches had more of a free right to gather and do their thing than people on campuses did. And so while there weren't any real large gatherings on campus and stuff like that, people were still gathering in churches to varying degrees of success. So there were states like New York and California who were very heavily, trying to prevent people from going to church. And that went all the way up to the Supreme Court. we actually got very favorable decisions for freedom of religion during that time. So for the purpose of my work, it really worked out a little bit. But, when I read that, it made sense to me as a free exercise attorney, because during COVID, yeah, churches were still kind of doing their thing, right? With varying degrees, just depending on where you were, what state, what the restrictions were. And so that's kind of where this all culminated too, with him meeting Erica and all that, and these other people coming in, running Turning Point Action, like Tyler Boyer, stuff like that. That's really where, as far as I can tell, where it really started to, go outside the lines, so shall we say, or at least started going in the direction of noncompliance with the tax code, particularly as it relates to political activities, right? And then, the other night I showed you that article for Ministry Watch, and then Trigger Point showed you the next day, but I showed you the article where Rob McCoy and Charlie Kirk were quoted in various parts. But basically the idea was, hey, Turning Point Faith is intended to go to bring politics to these churches, essentially against the restriction in 501c3. And hey, we have this law firm, they're ready to defend you if you get in trouble and stuff like that. So it really right there, just as it reported his statements, really shows like an intention to throw compliance, at least with the tax code for sure, out the window. And then let's see. In 2022, so this is another video I covered the other day, we saw in 2022, there was an IRS complaint filed against TPUSA, particularly for the work that they were doing supporting that Kerry Lake for governor, I believe in Arizona, like around 2020, I think was the election that really, but we didn't see the complaint really materialize till like 2022. 2020, I believe that's when it was, but we talked about it yesterday, was the FEC complaint against Turning Point Action was filed. And so just there, right? So it's like nothing in the first 4 to 5, 6 years. And then all of a sudden we have, stated intentions not to go within the lines of 501c3. Then we see an IRS complaint. We see some FEC violations with Turning Point Action. Again, we talked about that yesterday, where I think $1.4 million was alleged to have been in violation of reporting requirements. The FEC in 2024, which presumably would have been Trump controlled, came and said, no, there's only like 30,000 worth of unreported stuff here, and the only reason we're holding that is because Turning Point basically admitted to it. And so one question I wanted to post here, and I'm going to do some more digging on this, but I don't know if we ever be able to truly get an exact answer. But my question is this, and it's about Turning Point Action. As we've learned through all the different content creators over the last week or two, is that 501c4s can do 50% of their activity, political activity, that 501c3s are otherwise restricted to do. So just the question that I had is, like, I would be curious to know if we were able to go back and actually reconstruct everything Turning Point Action did, would it fall within the 50% guideline there in the tax code? And so, I'm just going to say, this is just my general impression from what I've seen, over this time we've been talking about looking at TPUSAs, that they probably were. But again, that's just my impression. I don't have hard facts to substantiate that. It's just my opinion and impression based upon what I have seen. And so also wanted to mention here, 2024, Tyler Boyer was personally pardoned by President Trump for charges that related to election fraud. Now, he was pardoned by President Trump on the federal, and in all fairness, the state also let the state charges drop too. But just interesting because we're kind of marking the relationship, right, between Trump and TPUSA and Turning Point entities, essentially. And then I want to also bring up that we talked also about preaching politics from the pulpit. That in 2025, the IRS announced, as part of the settlement with the national religious broadcasters, that it wouldn't be seeking to enforce the political activity restriction against churches. And so, again, not directly bearing in necessarily on the relationship between Trump and Turning Point USA, but just kind of the overall scheme of where the Trump administration's at on these things as well. And then I also wanted to mention, we just talked about, both myself and Wolves in Finance pointed out Erica Kirk's, seemingly glaring violation a 501c3 by endorsing JD Vance. And just remember that settlement that the IRS talked about was only related to not enforcing it against churches. Well, TPUSA is a 501c3, but it's not a church. So even if we consider what the IRS just announced, it still would be, Turning Point USA within the gambit of what they are still allegedly willing to enforce. So I just wanted to bring that up. So again, what we're seeing is that there's been some potential violations of the tax code over the years, pretty glaring. Election code, obviously, we're going to sort this out too. Is that Trump was in office 2016 to 2020, out 20 to 24, and if we look right, when did the complaints get filed in this? Right within that gap where it was President Biden was in office, and I'll say this in a minute, but just that whole thing's funny to me, and I'll tell you in a minute why it all is really funny. So let's talk about Trump's kind of involvement with Turning Point that we know of, or that I've seen at least and documented here to talk about. One, I wanted to say that a lot of very credible legal or political commentators, attribute Trump's 2024 election to Turning Point USA. And I think there's also plenty of commentators that would at least in some way, contribute or attribute at least some of his election in 2020 or 2016 to Turning Point. So we see that there's been a pretty clear indication that Turning Point has been an ally for President Trump in a very major way in getting him elected. Okay. So yeah, and then in the 2020 election cycle, right, that's where some of these complaints and other items that we've now retroactively gone and looked at really started, where a lot of the violations, stuff like that started to occur and really started to coming more to the light through these publicly filed complaints. Let's note that Trump appeared at Charlie Kirk's memorial service, which for many people seemed to look more like a political rally. And I would just note kind of generally, what it looked to me after Charlie Kirk's death, untimely unaliving, is that it was politicized a bit, right? From Trump and the right, and I'm not whatever, but I saw some politicizing of it there in my opinion anyways. And it really had to relate to the furry, like, oh, they're furries. They're furries and lefties, and they killed Charlie Kirk. And so again, that was just my impression. And then, Trump pardoned Tyler Boyer. We just mentioned that too. Turning Point Action 2022. Now, what really, got my eyes like, whoa, was the letter from the Treasury Secretary to Erica. And now, Wolves in Finance said the other day that it was his opinion, and maybe some others he mentioned, that when they look at where it said Erica, that was scratched out. It's not Miss Kirk, Erica, that looked like President Trump's handwriting. Now, I've had other people, I think in my comments section, say they didn't think that looked like Trump's writing. So I'm not going to say it was, but let's be real. At the end of the day, the Treasury Secretary, who obviously his name was on that letter, is obviously part of the Trump administration. And so we can, in a sense, attribute what I perceived, as a favor, this letter from the IRS coming within like a 3 or 4 day turnaround saying, oh, no, you're good. No investigation. These letters that hardly ever, I've never been aware of a non-investigation letter from the government. Not saying it's never happened before. I've never seen one prior to this, just to be quite honest, in the turnaround. So again, I say that because that more so than almost anything. The pardoning of Tyler Boyer's obviously pretty overt, but really that letter almost just as much as that was really to me like an overt, in my opinion, overt political favor from Trump to Erica TPUSA, right? And just going to go. Does Tyler Boyd, sorry, I'm answering, but it's kind of relevant. Does Tyler Boyd's pardon provide him immunity as it relates to these potential TPUSA tax violation issues? No. This had to do with the 2020. They were, to be honest, I'm not that hip on the election laws, so I can't really assess exactly what the charges were, but had to do something like fraud, like signing their signatures on something that to do with the presidential election that they shouldn't have. So again, those were just allegations. He's been pardoned. The state dropped their case, so I'm not going to sit there and say, but anytime you're indicted or facing federal charges and you get pardoned, that's a pretty big deal, right? Because if we consider that, I think the U.S. Attorney's Office has like a 97% conviction rate. So like most of the time they go to tee it up, pretty signed, sealed, and delivered type thing. So a pardon on a federal case, especially if you're, already in jail, is, very big political favored deal most of the time, right? And then I wanted to lastly mention, and if correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think like Vice President Vance like flew Charlie Kirk's body allegedly like out of Utah, like on Air Force One or something the day after. But, again, just all these things to kind of point to a very close relationship there, to point to where Trump and people part of his administration are willing to overtly do favors or help Turning Point USA where they might not be willing to do things or help other people. Does that make sense? And so now we're kind of at the end here, kind of the juicy part, but what does this mean for, what are the prospects of potentially seeing some either investigation or enforcement action against TPUSA by the IRS or the U.S. Attorney generally, right? So let's talk about that for a minute. So here I want to mention what I was saying earlier about this was a 2022 investigation. Okay, now this was during Biden's administration, and it was called Operation Arctic Frost. And apparently it was the FBI's investigation of the Trump administration, Trump people, and then like Turning Point USA, Turning Point Action, like the Turning Point entities for like election fraud, or not say election fraud, but like a federal election law violations. Okay. And so let's talk about that real quick. Now, we talked the other day where Charlie Kirk in 2021 was being pretty overt and stating, hey, Turning Point Faith, which is Initiative Turning Point USA, we don't really plan to respect that, provision against political activity. And so with that being said, if the FBI were actually investigating TPUSA and them at the time, I would assume it wouldn't have been very hard for them to come across some pretty glaring violations of the tax code. And so, why wasn't action taken? Okay, so in 2022, the same year that this FBI investigation was going down, there was the complaint filed. And I think that we can assess that there seemed to have been some merit to both that complaint and just generally with Turning Point through the faith, bringing politics to churches. So, it just makes me question, if Turning Point USA was so critical in helping Trump get elected, and I think that was also the case in 2016, obviously the Biden administration, the Democratic Party, would have seemingly had a lot of impetus or drive to shut all that down, right? I mean, am I right? If these entities are being in a major way responsible for your opponent getting elected, yet they're violating the law. I mean, doesn't it seem like that's, and again, I'm not an advocate for political prosecution by any stretch of the imagination, but at the end of the day, in reality, if there's an actual legal violation and it just conveniently is politically favorable for you, you would figure that they would follow through with that. So, and again, this is kind of some speculation, and I'm definitely not speculating specifically, but I think that there's actually people affiliated, donors, certain class of people, donors affiliated with the Turning Point entities that are truly behind the kind of protection, evidently, that we're seeing, that nothing's being done, because it seems to me that they were able to shake complaints, investigation. Hey, Lisa, what are you saying? What happened where? Oh, the post office. Oh, she's talking to him. Okay. Sorry. But anyways, so, it's just very strange to me. This didn't happen. And in my opinion, guesstimation is that there's actually some people involvement with TPUSA that transcends political parties, keeping it afloat, essentially. Uniparty protections. Yeah, something of that nature. Yeah, I guess we can label it that. So again, just very interesting to me because, with that being said, if they failed to act then, where the climate for enforcement was as good as favorable as it could be, what does that mean for prospects of the future, seeing any kind of enforcement here in the future based upon what we now know is going on? So let's say this, with the Trump administration, based upon this letter and some other things that we just discussed with the relationship between those two, any kind of hope that something's going to happen until 2028, even if in midterms, the Congress is switched, they can certainly investigate those things, but I don't think Congress is going to have the authority necessarily to force the attorney general to go out and, enforce these things or enforce the IRS to do that. Now, there could be some kind of other constitutional or legal powers I'm not necessarily aware of. And I know that Congress can certainly investigate, call them to Congress, ask questions, stuff like that. But at the end of the day, I don't know what, if any, enforcement power that Congress actually has. So in that case, we would then have to look to, well, maybe if the party switch in 2028, because I think it's fair to say JD Vance gets the president based upon what we've seen, we might not be looking at a favorable climate for enforcement then either. Okay. So again, unfortunately, I don't see it, happening in the very near future. And to be quite honest, maybe more so than what political party is in power, thinking in terms of enforcement, maybe we should be looking at what foreign influence is running the show behind the scenes. That might be the more important, thing to look at here in terms of really, in my opinion, I'll do more videos on this, but what's wrong with our political and legal and social systems generally. I think that taking care of that problem I just mentioned might help take care of some of these others too. And I think that both parties are really coming together on this issue of getting foreign, government and other entity involvement out of our country. I do. And so I think that would actually be more of an indicator on whether we're going to ever see some enforcement or some type of, call it what you will, justice effectuated here. And so let me talk about the FEC violation, because that's funny too, right? It's like the FEC during Biden's administration, there's a complaint filed. They take action. The case is currently pending. And then Trump gets to be the president. And again, the FEC did hit them a little bit, but it was really, just a slap on the wrist. So did that have to do with the fact that Trump is obviously favorable Coach Colin, Philadelphia. Yeah, maybe I'll start using Philadelphia on here too. But yeah, I think y'all know where I'm getting at. So that seemed like a slap on the wrist too. So again, you see these things and we're all hyped up because we want justice and we want to make sure that if we're giving to nonprofits, that it's being used appropriately in accordance with the law. So again, I just, I think as far as if the one issue with the Philadelphia, with the foreign lobby government, if that's the issue, maybe in midterms, maybe we will see something happen, right? If that's the issue. But I think even then, even if we take care of that issue, it probably still would be looking to 2028. I did want to mention real quick, because I think people have had questions about this too, is like, well, Greg, if these people were found in violation of the tax code for what we've been looking at, like what are the potential penalties for that? Well, whether they would actually go to prison or be potentially, to be criminally punitive, it just depends on the circumstances, what's involved. Normally though, like for instance, let's talk about like the interested transactions that we are looking at, and we think that potentially there were some double dealing with Turning Point Action, Turning Point USA, and these outside companies, meaning that there were people working for TPUSA also on the take, potentially, allegedly on the other side there. Now, normally the penalty for that, like Barron said the other night, is an excise tax. And, he said it can get pretty hefty, and it actually can. And so for people who are actually involved in an interested transaction, okay, so like the superfeed thing, let's say that in this hypothetical, let's say that Tyler Boyer was found to be on both sides of that transaction. He would face an excise tax of 25% of whatever that ill gain was. So whatever they found that he got, whatever he got not within accordance with the laws, he would have to pay a 25% tax on that. And then from what I've read is that if you don't pay that pretty quickly, they start going up in percentage, and it can even get up to 200% pretty quick from my understanding. And so potentially, if you were unable to pay that, that might also be the impetus for, potentially jail time. So again, there is a potential for jail time. It would depend on the certain facts. Obviously, there's also this potential for an excise tax. Yeah, I agree. It should be more than 25% too. It should just be that you give the ill-gotten gains up. And also too, just so y'all are aware, let's talk about the other officers and directors. So even though these other officers and directors weren't necessarily, if they didn't benefit from the transaction, they can still be fined a 10% excise tax of whatever that gain was for knowingly approving a double-sided transaction like that. So the whole board and executive team who were involved in approving these contracts, regardless of whether they actually benefited from it or not personally, they could still potentially be hit with a 10% excise tax on that, on top of the 25 to the people who did for sure benefit from the transaction. And so, and then obviously, and I think the one that would be the most appropriate, and I think the one that people actually would be very more happy to see, is revocation of tax exempt status. And so for something like violating the political restrictions, where it's not like a monetary value that you gained, outside of the law, loss of tax exemption would be the, thing there. And look, with Turning Point, their tax exempt status, I mean, they got so much money. I don't know if tax exempt status being taken away or not would really affect them much. And I didn't work that out in my head fully before I said that, but just thinking with all the money going through, like, do they even need to be tax exempt per se? Anyways, lest I digress. And so, yeah. So anyways, that's kind of all I really had about this. Again, I wanted to end up with just kind of surmising, thinking about if and when we might see some potential liability or enforcement here. And again, that's not to say necessarily that there's stuff there for them to enforce. I mean, although I will say the thing with Eric Kirk the other day, pretty glaring. And I do think that there's quite a bit of merit to some of the other things that have been pointed out. But, I just always want to leave that possibility that perhaps the real facts aren't exactly as we've been led to believe or from what we see. So just always want to leave that out there. Yeah. So, but for us in the public, I do hope that there's accountability, because I do see a predominant majority of people, at least in our sphere in this community, are like, yeah, when's this going to happen? We don't like this. We don't like the idea that these people are going around the country and doing what we perceive as violating the laws and collecting money, and in many ways turn around and just gaslight us every chance they get, whether it's directly through TPUSA or some of these other content creators who just consistently try to gaslight us. I just made a post. I talked about a Paramount Tactical video I watched last night where Gary, and God bless Gary, and this attorney that he talked to, but they're essentially gaslighting us for asking questions. And so I'm going to do a response video to that. It'll be very cordial and respectful. I don't have anything against them per se, but I do want to provide an opposite, opinion or viewpoint from a lawyer to what they were putting out there. And I think it's very well deserved for this community. Let me look real quick at the comments. Thank y'all very much, by the way. I love each and every one of y'all. It's very, very special for me. Let's see. And thank y'all for all the nice words. Epstein files have put me off the whole lot, especially after hearing those tapes you were talking about. Yeah. So just so you know, the thing that broke the camel's back, ladies and gentlemen, was a deposition tape that I saw from this lady who, again, it's a deposition. So, I'm free and you're free to find her credible or not find her credible. Well, I found her credible. And when she was discussing the specifics of some of the things that Trump had done to her and some of these other girls, and it was very disturbing to me, just to say the least. So yeah, that's really where it was like, and then and when I heard it, it just made sense with a lot of the other context clues and evidence I had seen, right? And so that's where I was like, yeah, I can't do it anymore. I can't. I'll say, you've seen some of these other, like Nick Fuentes and some of these other content creators trying to make it, feel okay that, these old men, hey, 14, 15-year-old girl, like, hey, just 14, 15, let me tell you something. One, I don't agree with that as a matter of principle and morals, just as it is, but also as a matter of justice. How many people are sitting many, many years, and how many 19-year-olds are in prison right now because they were with like a 17-year-old. Okay. And so, you see what I mean? Justice is justice. And so as much as you want to try to smooth these things over, post hoc stuff like that, that's your, that's your volition, whatever you want to do. But at the end of the day, justice is justice. And so that's not working for me and on many different levels. And sorry I went into that, because I just wanted to go a little bit further on that, my thoughts on that, let's see. I believe Charlie was betrayed by several people close to him, and so weird his security didn't do their job properly. Just my opinion. So, yeah, exactly. I feel you there too. And conveniently, they've really just released enough evidence for us to like just kind of sit here and ponder a lot and do some analysis and stuff. Don't get me wrong. But it's just so suspicious. What they have given us just so suspicious. And we're looking at the video 100 million times. And there's not been one time I looked at it where I thought, oh, yeah, these people in and around Charlie are up to good. I just don't get that impression when I see the video. Yeah, I do think that's what happened, and I think it's terrible. I hope we get justice for it one day, if that is what indeed occurred. What would be the 50% of non-political activities that TPUS action took part in? I think they are 100% political. Well, no, that's right. I mean, so yeah, so we say, yeah, what are the non-political activities? Well, and I think they and maybe Wolves in Finance talked about this the other day, but I think they did do some get out the vote drives and stuff like that, which if it was nonpartisan and not tailored to helping people vote for a specific candidate would have been within 501c4. But I'm like you, and I was being very generous earlier when I was talking about my estimation of whether, that was a thing, them violating 501c4. But it's just because I haven't, in God, could you think about how much time it would to really go back and try to sort out everything they did and then try to get a percentage of it? Yeah. So look, if there is enforcement, I'll leave that to the IRS and them to go sort that one out. But yeah, I do just generally agree with your assessment there. I do. There were no written bylaws, no organization articles. Charity regulations were found back to 2013. Bill Montgomery seemed shady to me. Yeah, no, I agree. That Bill guy, it's just really weird. And Barron pointed it out too. It's like Charlie going around with an older man like that, like staying in hotel rooms, going to college. Again, I don't know if anything is going on. It's just kind of a weird situation. And we see how it all turned out, regardless of whether there was anything between them or whatever. But like, you see how it turned out, man. And that's another thing too, that, perhaps maybe the nonprofit, non-political activities restriction. I mean, I think we're seeing like exhibit A of why they have that restriction, right? Because it's just so prone to abuse, so prone to corruption potentially, right? Because of the tax exemption and the fact that the Treasury Secretary, who's an executive branch agency, part of the cabinet, is a political position, right? And so again, there's just a lot of room for abuse there with, different administrations coming in and out. And yeah, I think we're seeing the fallout there. And I know I've had some discussion in the comments lately about the propriety of political discussion in the churches. And that's a very nuanced and long discussion. But for sure, on these just regular nonprofits doing political activities, I mean, I think this is, again, this exhibit A of what could potentially go wrong in these situations. And look, I mean, of course, we can't directly attribute that to like Charlie's untimely, unaliving or demise. But all the circumstances considered, I'm sure that did not help him unfortunately end up where he did, man. I just hate it. It's terrible. And again, for my other people out there, with the caveat, if he is indeed not with us anymore, again, I personally have not 100% written off that he might still be alive. Again, just not writing it off. I haven't, I'm not waking up every day like, where's Charlie Kirk? But just haven't completely written it off. Susan Arch gave her, our government is shady AF. Yeah. Well, it has. And again, I'm apolitical in this, right? There was, I saw corruption when Biden was in office. Like the whole COVID thing to me was a big wake up call and pushed me a little bit more in towards the right. Just how hardcore in our personal freedoms and liberties it was. Yeah, it pushed me to the right. So, but again, I saw some corruption in that. So it's been all parties here for me with the corruption. And right now, my diagnosis, as I discussed a minute ago, is the foreign Philadelphia involvement has a lot to do with it. And I'm of the opinion that if we can start to correct that problem, I think some of these other issues will neatly work themselves out. I don't know that, just me kind of speculating. Have a look at interview with Scott Bessent by Andrew Colvett on October 15th. Okay, I'm going to write that down. I assume it's on YouTube. Colvett on October 15th. Okay, I'll check that out. Thank you. The clip of Erica that Candace played yesterday, Erica absolutely made his death about politics. Yeah, did you hear that? I listened to it too, the recording of that, the audio recording of the Zoom call. Man, you know, again, and we can always go back to people do grieve differently. I sure haven't seen people grieve and get over that much. And again, like you say, there's an element there of making, his demise and everything about politics. Yeah, it's just gross, in my view. No, I haven't heard of the post office scandal in the UK. Okay, so it wasn't good. Uniparty protections. Let's see. I think there was no Schedule B filed who the big donors were. Okay, Hoaxing World, are you suggesting with the FEC violations in 2022? Yeah, because it had to do with non-reporting, and part of the reporting requirements were that they had to disclose, who the donors were for certain donations that qualified, et cetera, et cetera. So you very well could be, that very well could be it. Again, I'm not real. I've learned the free exercise laws very, very well. Not too hip on the election laws per se, but doing this channel, one of the aspects why I really like this idea is because it's going to force me to go and get educated on a lot of different topics, and I've been wanting to do that. I just haven't had the motivation quite yet, but I'm getting there. So yeah. There are no consequences anymore for the powerful, yet out jails are full. Yeah, that's right. And just so y'all know, I grew up in a small town in Northeast Texas, predominantly minority place. And I grew up around a lot of very poor people. During my addiction, I was homeless on the streets for almost 2 years. So I've lived that life too. And yeah, it's our jails are full with people who might or might not necessarily deserve to be there, and with a lot of innocent people too. And so I think y'all have seen my introduction to a lot of my videos talking about the drug laws. I will get there because I think once I do, what he's saying is very true. The way the drug laws were structured ensures that there are a lot of innocent people in jail. And then you have these rich, powerful people out here really doing, as far as the Epstein stuff is concerned, in my eyes, that's as worse of a thing you can do outside of murdering somebody in cold blood. Okay. Just doing it. Yeah. And being protected. We don't know who these other people are. The files are constantly being, fought. And then we got all these excise things. So yeah, it's, not a good thing for me right now. And I will start covering the Epstein files and stuff too. As a matter of fact, I had an idea at one time to come on every day and say, don't forget about the Epstein files. Cause I think that's what a lot of them are hinging on, that we forget about it. So I'll do my best to remind y'all that we should not forget about that. Susan, I lost my husband to a construction accident. I was a vegetable for a year. I hate to hear that. I'm so sorry, Susan. Yeah, I lost my mother very young when I was in law school at 24 from like a sudden, she had a sudden stroke. So it was like an overnight thing. Like one night I'm talking to my mom, next day during law school finals, she's gone. So I get it. And yeah, now I was in my addiction at the time, so I coped how I did, but needless to say, I wasn't right on the inside, and it definitely would have been quite some time before I could even come out and speak about it to people without just completely breaking down. Let's see. Oh, I appreciate that. Let's say you were probably talking to Susan. Yeah. So sad, Susan. I'm sorry about that. Monetizing a man's murder is unimaginable, and that's what they've done. And saying it's what Charlie would have wanted. No, he wanted to be alive with his kids. I think that's fair to say. I think that's very fair to say. Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy, and just the hijacking of his, and that's another part earlier when I said that, the Trump administration showed to me that they were really, I think, waiting on standby to politicize that thing. And yeah, and the politicizing of it is worse to me than the monetizing of it, or just equally as bad. And I guess those things in a lot of ways go in tandem with TPUSA, because people are donating, and then they're doing the political endorsements and stuff. And so it's just a whole, yeah, it just doesn't have a good feel for me. Yeah. Um, why are TPUSA cease and desist letters coming from a lawyer in Indianapolis? Thought their headquarters are in Arizona. So that's a very good question. So in actually, when you look at their state filings, meaning their state of incorporation, what we would call in the law their domicile, they're actually domiciled in Indiana. Now, the entities were originally formed in Illinois. And then for whatever reason, well, I think Charlie and them in Chicago, but for some reason it then came over to Indiana. In Arizona, they're filed there, but they're filed as a foreign entity. So you can do that. So like if you're a company based in New York, but you're doing business in Texas, well, then you file as a foreign entity in Texas. And so that's how they're established in Arizona, but their actual corporate headquarters in Arizona. And you can do that. You can be domiciled per your filings in another state, but have like an office headquarters in another. You can do that. And so, but why are there cease and desist letters coming from Indianapolis? I mean, that's a very good question. I think it's, as I said the other day, and Barron pointed it out too, is that, a lawyer and I practice all over the country, just so y'all know. I'm very niche in what I do. And so I'm in state and federal courts, trial and appellate, all the time. But where the violation was here is that when you write a demand letter and you like threaten legal action against somebody, a lawyer has to do that, because if otherwise it's practicing law, and also a lawyer in state. And so this lawyer from Indiana sending a letter to Arizona threatening legal action is unauthorized practice of law in Arizona. And it can also get you dinged by the bar in Indiana. And Barron had actually suggested Zach file complaints in both. And so why do they do that? I don't know. I mean, look, with as much money as they've got, like, they can hire a lawyer anywhere. I don't understand why they had their Indiana lawyer write that letter. And just based upon the substance of the letter, my opinion, my perspective, that wasn't one he wanted to write, and probably especially so now because he might get dinged for it. It just, in my opinion, their claims just weren't that strong. And ultimately, if we assume that they might have something in discovery that they don't want to have to disclose, I don't know that. I'm just theorizing for this hypothetical. Again, it'd be dumb to open that can of worms. It really would, in my opinion. And then let me ponder this for a second. Let me ponder this. When I saw that letter from the IRS in the context of Wolves and Finance's cease and desist letter, I thought, is this something, because they're going to have to prove falsity if they ever pull the trigger and sue Zach or another content creator. And so my thought was, instead of like doing discovery or producing documents to prove that what he's saying is false, are they just going to try to lean on that letter and say, oh no, we don't have to produce any documents or anything? But the IRS is saying that, we're not being investigated. Therefore, what he's saying is false. And I can just say those two things don't equate. Just because you're not being investigated doesn't necessarily mean you haven't been engaged in some kind of illegal activity. But I thought, well, maybe they're trying to use that as a way to where they could sue Zach without having to go through the discovery process, or at least open so far wide up in the discovery process. So again, I don't know if that's true. And I don't even know how successful it would be. It's just something that crossed my mind as an attorney. I wanted to share with y'all. Thank you for, losing my mom was very hard. It hit me. It sure did. What is the name of the lawyer? I remember seeing recently a newly hired attorney from Florida, I believe, was associated with Epstein somehow. To be honest with you, I don't have that lawyer's name on top of my head. Obviously, I think you go to Wolves and Finance video. I know he shows a copy of the letter. You might be able to get it there, and maybe he says it too in that first video. Potentially, he does. Give Greg a follow. Yeah, thank y'all. Yeah, almost 600 subs, man. I'm pumping. I'm going. Thank y'all very much. I'd never expected for this to grow this quick. Special thanks to Danks. You know, he did a live stream with me. Mr. Let Go did a live stream with me, like within the first few days of my channel, which really helped. And so thank y'all very, very much. I'm pretty much fully committed to this. I mean, I've put quite a bit of money into it. I'm enjoying doing this every day. I'm enjoying sitting in bed every night, like thinking, what do I want to present tomorrow? You know, and then drawing up an outline, coming and doing it. I'm really enjoying it. So thank y'all very much. Let's see. Could anyone sue TPUSA like members of the public? So that's a good question. I don't think so. Maybe a public interest group or something might. That's a good question. I don't think so. I think it'd have to well, I mean, they could sue TPUSA if TPUSA did them wrong. So for instance, now this might be a suit, again, just musing here. If someone gave a donation to TPUSA and they felt that they misrepresented their tax exempt status or their tax code conformity, even though they have that letter, you still potentially, and this just guess me, you might be able to file a fraud case. And, again, that letter from the IRS isn't factual in court, meaning that it doesn't like establish for fact, like in a case like that they weren't, actually being fraudulent with it. So, that's very interesting. I'll think on a little bit more about probably a public interest suit against them in that regard. And I'm sorry, I don't know this more off the top of my head. I don't think so. I think for like tax code violations, it'd have to be through the IRS. But again, there could be other outside of tax code causes of action, lawsuits that potentially could be pursued. And I'm just musing on that. Charles Ortel has been a few months on the IRS stuff. He is on the Jason Goodman show on Sundays. Okay, I'll check that out. Jason Goodman Sundays. Is he like a tax attorney or something? Or has he just been, I wonder, I guess, covering the stuff pretty good? Charles Ortel. Cool, thank you. Check that out. Wow, interesting legal mistake to make. Yikes. Seems like TPUSA was just trying to scare Rules and Finance from talking. Yeah, and I mean, I think it was really directed at all of us, to be quite honest with you, just my opinion. It went to Rules and Finance. One went to Candace. I think they were trying to cover all their bases there. But yeah, I think it's really directed at all of us. Yeah, but to be quite honest with you, this subject matter that we're speaking about, to me, this is like what the First Amendment's for, right? Like this is really what the First Amendment's meant to protect. Now, within reason, right? We can't just go out here shouting falsities and stuff like that. But to the extent that we're reporting otherwise accurate information and coming to some conclusions, our opinion on the matter, like that's what the First Amendment is truly intended to protect. I do feel that. Kitzel Pie. The law firm is Hackman Hewlett. Okay. Donors, maybe. Oh, I'm not sure, Lisette, what you were asking that on the donors, maybe. The folks that didn't get their hats. Oh yeah, the folks that didn't get their hat that were promised. Yeah, man. I mean, that could be a class action lawsuit. Maybe I'll take the case. Class action against TPUSA for promising. Opinion. I'm not saying for sure that there's some kind of slam dunk class action, but I'm just saying that, if there was a valid claim there, underlying claim, from they have been grifting like crazy after Charlie's death. Yeah, and so the article I read last night, that was talking about, basically tracking, when Charlie and Rob McCoy got together in TP Faith and this whole move into the churches. And one of their ex-employees who was very close to him, I guess when that happened, they thought it was a grift at that point, and they ended up, leaving and separating, and that's kind of what it was based on. But yeah, you say that, it's like even some of their longtime hardcore people were turned off whenever this whole thing with Rob McCoy specifically took off. And that was their opinion. Their opinion was like, this is just a grift and I'm not going to be involved in it anymore. So, I don't know. 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 Lisa, folk that donate TPUSA were told they will get a hat for their, yeah, okay, yeah, the hat thing. Yeah, that's a potential thing too. You know, and look, you know, I'm not sitting here trying to drum up people to go file a bunch of lawsuits against anyone, really. But I think, you know, from these comments, it really shows me what I was saying earlier is that me, you, us, our community have a real hunger to see some type of accountability to the point to where it seems that citizens are willing to take matters into their own hands should this linger for too much longer. So, you know, we're sitting here talking about it. We might very well see some type of lawsuit from private citizens against TPUSA in some jurisdiction. So, hey, we'll definitely keep our ear to the ground and see what happens. And you know, if they do, we'll definitely be talking about it, report on it, and it'd be very interesting. Let's see, award in 2009. Okay. Ortel fraud investigator and more. Okay, he has a bio. Okay, I'll check him out. Erica herself said they had 50,000 had. Oh, she did. Yeah, 6 is a lot. And I've heard of at least one or two people, and maybe that was Zach that said the other day he had some emails or something from people who didn't get their hats. I mean, and you know, some people might think, oh, that's just ridiculous. You know, it's just a hat, blah blah blah. But like, man, people were very endeared by Turning Point USA, and you know, the point to where they wanted to support them with a hat and stuff. And you know, I don't, maybe it's not really bad faith per se. Maybe just the hat thing is, you know, maybe the production is behind, but it's just kind of a full picture thing for me where it's like, you know, uh, thank you. That would hopefully be some grounds for some lawsuits. Yeah, it potentially could be, you know, and I know it sounds a little petty, but hey, um, people just are not pleased with what they're seeing with TPUSA, TPA, those entities. And, you know, I think people are kind of tired seeing some of the stuff from the administration too. So yeah. Well, anyways, we're in an hour, y'all. I'm not going to bore y'all to death. Thank y'all so very much for showing up and supporting me today in here. I'll probably do another tomorrow. I'm not sure what we'll talk about yet, but we'll definitely. And so just a couple of announcements is, I'm putting a new computer on order. Hopefully it'll be here within a week. When I do, I'm going to connect my OBS with YouTube. So that way, when I do these live streams, I can share stuff. I try to do more talking than sharing. But I do, there's, you know, obviously there's stuff I want to share and show y'all, things like that. And so I will be doing that. Again, got new stuff coming. So we'll be upping the content quality and stuff. And yeah, thank y'all, man. No, thank y'all. I hope y'all got something out of this. And yeah, if y'all see anything different, you know, if you're going about your business, you see something that might indicate enforcement or non-enforcement, let me know and I can come back and we'll talk about it some more. But I'll definitely be keeping my, you know, finger on the pulse here on, are we going to see accountability or not? So anyways, I'm going to take a break. Thank y'all very much from the bottom of my heart. Thank you. I love you. And yeah, I'll be around and I might post another video later on this evening. So keep your eyes peeled. All right. Peace, y'all. Thank you.